Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pacific Center podcast. I'm Dr. East, and I'm thrilled to be back with Alaine Duncan to talk about something that affects all of us, and that is trauma. And Alaine was here last year in 21, and she's back in 22 with even more information to share and wisdom and expertise in the areas of trauma, how to treat it, how to approach it in our practices and even in our lives. Alaine, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy
Thank
to
you,
see you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to be back, and I'm full of anticipation for the symposium, this time in person. Last year I was there virtually, and this time I'm coming to San Diego.
I know. Well, I'll be there. I'm going to be there all week, so I can't wait to be in person with you. And let's just dive in for the listeners and let them know, because your topics, the titles of your talks don't do them justice. So this is a great opportunity for you to share what you really are going to talk about. I know on November 6th from 11 to noon, you're going to talk about 5-element applications to manage challenging people and circumstances. And I already start to think about, like, you mean challenging patients that don't listen to us? Or so can you explain a little bit more about that? I'm sure it ties into trauma somehow.
Yeah. I had this big word in my original title. The word was allostasis. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about allostasis. So our allostatic capacity is how this massively beautiful symphony of body systems come together when we experience something that's too much, too fast, without adequate support, which is my definition of trauma. So it's gives a foundation for us to understand why so many trauma survivors have complex multi-symptom illness. Because if we put our hand on a hot stove, it's not just our skin that gets affected. We get an adrenaline rush that helps us remember not to touch hot stoves. Our immune system gets activated. Our fluid system gets that, like, lots of things get activated. So as it underlies the importance for restoring core regulation as opposed to chasing symptoms, because our patients are going to have a whole lot of symptoms. It's not unusual for a trauma survivor to have irritable bowel and migraine headaches and an autoimmune disorder, and all kinds of things all wrapped in one package. And if we treat a symptom, we miss the underlying dysregulation that really is what's calling us forward. So we're going to talk about allostasis and how to use the 5-element model as a way to help restore essential regulation in trauma survivors.
I love it, because like you said, too often as practitioners, we are just looking at the symptoms. And so you're going to, in just that little short talk in the morning, get into definite strategies of being able to differentiate and look at some of the symptoms that are being presented, and then see more of the allostasis, as you say.
Right. Actually, that's the afternoon session. The morning session is the 5-element strategies for trauma survivors with, oh, maybe it is. No, you're right. No, you're right. Okay.
Hey, just for anybody listening, this is fair because she has 3 talks. So it would be very hard to keep them all like organized on this talk right now.
So in the morning, we're going to talk about, so there's 5 steps in the self-protective response. That's defined by neurobiology. And the fabulous thing is that those 5 steps are mirrored in the movement of the Shen cycle and the 5 elements. So we're going to look at, I've renamed the 5 steps. Awaken arousal belongs to the metal. Signal threat belongs to the water. Mobilize a response belongs to the wood. Restore coherence belongs to the fire, and digest the gristle belongs to the earth. So our task then is, if someone experiences an overwhelming event and they aren't successful in moving through all those 5 steps, they're more likely to have symptoms. So we get to use our Chinese medicine diagnostic lens, pulse reading, tongue diagnosis, 5-element diagnosis, to sort out which step got thwarted, and then use our acupuncture, our touch, our herbs, our qigong, our tai chi, all the beauty of Chinese medicine to help restore that missing piece that didn't allow them to successfully complete their response to threat. But there's more, because I have the thesis that it is not our full, we have more of an opportunity to serve, and it's to build capacity in those 5 elements. So it's not enough to repair what got lost or what was inadequate way back when. In terms of the metal, it's also our job to help people be curious about what's new in their environment. It's not enough to just awaken arousal to what didn't work in the past. We can also establish curiosity for people that are different from us. We can, instead of meeting them with a sense of threat, we can meet them with curiosity. And curiosity is a parasympathetic function. So the more that we can expand capacity for our patients in their metal element, to notice that there's something new, but notice what's new that's also delightful, not just notice what's a threat. And
I love that.
And in terms of the water, we don't just need to signal threat, we also need to signal safety. We need to cultivate capacity to distinguish fear from discomfort. Am I uncomfortable and think I'm afraid? Is there a basis for my fear? Maybe not. Maybe I'm uncomfortable because this is unfamiliar to me. So how can I expand my capacity to recognize that I'm actually safe? This is the basis of a lot of the community violence and domestic violence. People think they're not safe, but really they're uncomfortable. So we have people pulling out guns in Atlanta and shooting women. You know, we have people going into grocery stores in Buffalo and shooting customers. They aren't unsafe. They think they're unsafe, but they aren't unsafe. They're raised in a certain culture that has raised them to think that they're unsafe. So we have a tremendous opportunity to expand capacity to recognize safety and fear and the difference between discomfort and threat.
I love that. I just highlighted that we as practitioners have yet one more tool in our toolbox, and it's not a needle and it's not an herb. It's just a reframing and a guiding the patient into curiosity, which, like you said, is a parasympathetic function.
Exactly.
And that's powerful. If
That's
anybody gets something out of this podcast, that right there is powerful.
So then
that
I just
is
want to
amazing.
go through the other, in terms of the wood element, its job is to mobilize a response, and we need it to be able to mobilize a response for us, but we can expand that capacity to mobilizing a response that's commensurate with the level of threat. Sometimes we need to use a fly swatter, and that's enough. So how do we help people distinguish the level of threat that they're really experiencing and what's really necessary, so that people don't overdo or underdo? We have to be able to defend ourselves. We don't want to be just milquetoast. We have to defend ourselves, but it needs to be commensurate with the level of threat. And in terms of the fire gives us the capacity to recognize that it's over. Like the heart sends out this message of alarm when we're threatened. Thankfully, it wakes up the whole kingdom of the body to activate everybody to respond. But when the threat is over, the heart should send out a message of equilibrium, equanimity, propriety, and we should know that it's over. When I was at the Veterans Administration, there were all kinds of vets who didn't know that it was over. They were still living in Vietnam. And they could name the jungle that they were in, but they couldn't name their grandson's t-ball team. So being able to recognize that it's over, that's the capacity of the fire element. And then the earth, the capacity is not just to digest the gristle, but also to harvest the lessons. Not harvest any lessons, harvest lessons that expand our life experience, not contract our life experience. Too often, if we got sideswiped by a blue pickup, we don't trust any blue pickups ever again in our lives. So we need to be able to harvest lessons that expand our ability to navigate life in a full and rich way that honors the communities that we live in and our place as members of communities. So we're going to talk a lot about capacity building through the whole weekend.
And you call it allostatic capacity.
Well, it certainly is a relationship, because the wider our zone of resiliency, the more allostatic capacity we have, the more capacity in each of the 5 elements that we have, the wider our allostatic load. We're going to be less likely to get triggered into a threat response if we have flexible, expansive allostatic capacity.
I love that. I have a question. In your experience, what percentage of patients and or people in the world are incomplete with that trauma cycle? Meaning they just haven't really gone through all of the elements of the trauma cycle and are incomplete there.
I think the vast majority of our patients, the vast majority of people who come to acupuncture come because we can address what I call the strange, rare, and peculiar. The things that are not linear and straightforward that Western medicine is so fabulous with. But the things that are just a little bit, I don't know how to understand this, or something doesn't work. Physiology is different in a trauma survivor. The rules don't always apply. And so our ability to be flexible and hold our patients as unique individuals is a real gift. And the unfortunate thing, of course, is that most of our training programs don't include neurophysiology. They don't include ethics of trauma, patients, how to manage trauma survivor. You know, all those things are so critically important when so many of our patients have trauma backgrounds, either conscious from car accident, trip and fall, street crime, or unconscious from before they had language and living in tissues. And we have access to people's tissues where the garbage trucks can't get to.
I would say the answer is a high percentage of our patients. I look back on my 25 years of practice, and I would say in the high 90th percentile, my patients were incomplete in that trauma cycle, and what they were coming to me with, those signs and symptoms, were reflective of an incomplete trauma cycle. Because once I got to know a patient and the real trauma or root was revealed, you know, through curiosity, questioning, and being that amazing practitioner detective, it always came to like some sort of trauma point.
Right. You know, and people will have their ticket for admission, like they might call you up for knee pain or back pain or headaches or something like that. But you know, I had a fellow who wanted help with knee pain, but when he showed up, he couldn't be on the table without his 2 stuffed animal loveys, which were his attachment figures. So clearly there was more to what was going on with him than his knee pain, and I needed to work with him, give him some attention for his knee pain, but hold him in this bigger context of a central regulation so that he could have the capacity to heal his knee pain.
I'm curious if we can explore for a moment an Eastern and Western overlap, and that is in the realm of EMDR. It's a Western approach to trauma. It's kind of like, you know, something happens, and instead of us filing that memory in the back filing cabinets, like most of the mundane memories of a day, we keep it in the forefront to keep us safe, like the blue pickup truck. Anytime I see a blue pickup truck, you know, danger, danger. So EMDR is a technique where the practitioner helps the patient dysregulate, and then go more into parasympathetic and file that memory. With the overlap, are we doing kind of the same thing with our medicine by having them go through the whole cycle and finish that cycle of the trauma and processing?
So I'm not trained in EMDR, so I can't really speak to it directly, but I think that what we are doing, you know, acupuncture's essential theory is regulation and balance between 2 opposing states, yin and yang. The neurophysiologists, they call it sympathetic and parasympathetic. We call it yang and yin. It's the same language. This is what really drew me into this work, was my early training in somatic experiencing, where they drew the picture of arousal and collapse. And I went, I know this. And then when they described the 5 steps to the self-protective response, and I said, my goodness, this is the 5 elements. This is an expression of the Tao. You know, this physiology is an expression of the Tao. And we have so much to offer because our science pairs up so beautifully with the autonomic nervous system.
One area that just occurred to me is in post-traumatic stress disorder. And there is a study and a science of it where some people have PTSD, and others have PTSG. The G stands for growth, post-traumatic stress growth. And it sounds like if somebody is able to process that trauma through all the 5 elements and expand the capacity of the elements and their allostatic capacity, they're in effect leading towards PTSG,
right,
versus D.
Right. What I tell people is that people who've experienced traumatic stress and digest it and work through it, they have to become bigger people. They have to cope with, why do bad things happen to good people? They have to cope with the spiritual dimensions of, why did this happen to me? They have to come to terms with big existential questions that require them to get really big. So I actually don't call it post-traumatic stress disorder, because I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's a natural response to an unnatural circumstance. I prefer trauma spectrum response. There's a range of responses. You don't have to hit the red bullseye in the center in order to have some level of disturbance related to a too much, too fast, without adequate support experience. There's a wide range, and the opportunity for this is where we come in, is we can help people move through those 5 steps and get to a sense of completion where they can live with what happened. And not only that, maybe they're a bigger person, maybe they have expanded capacity in these 5 arenas.
I love that. It's so powerful. Anybody over the age of 29 has most likely, had that dark night of the soul, and is now at that, they call it the Saturn return, has definitely had something big happen to them. And that, you're right. Our medicine is so very powerful. So in that one morning, going back to your talks, which are going to cover all of these topics within it that deal with trauma, the early morning one is manage challenging people and circumstances. Is that from a perspective of the practitioner or the perspective of the patient?
Yeah, that's the perspective of the capacity building in the patient.
Got it. Helping them. They're having is the patient having challenging people in their life, or the patient is our challenging person?
The patient is our challenging person. Yeah, they're very complex. They have multi-symptom illness. Where do we start? How do we begin?
Yeah. And I think there's also room to discuss, how do we broach subjects with them where they might not even want to look there, right? Like, okay, I'm coming in for knee pain, and you might suggest that it's coming from trauma, and they deny that. It absolutely is not from trauma. So how do we, that's a challenging situation as a practitioner. We clearly see it. Are there some strategies and tools that you use? And
I think the gift of our medicine is, on the one hand, we like other providers can see the disorganization of a trauma survivor. We can recognize there's some chaos going in here. And they don't necessarily need to have a story about it. In fact, many of them won't have a story. They've either forgotten or it happened before they had language. So we don't have to engage in story with them. We engage in their energy body. We're going to restore regulation to their essential selves. And we can talk about, some people will be offended or feel, marginalized by saying you're a trauma survivor. So sometimes I'll just talk about, the stresses in our lives, and not make it into a big thing. I always talk about core regulation. I always talk about restoration and balance. I always talk about enhancing your own body's capacity to heal itself.
Yeah, I like that language. It's very positive. It's very calling into the future. It doesn't let them sit and dwell in it, because you might have 2 types of patients. One that comes in and says, oh, it's no big deal. I almost died 5 times. No big deal. And they don't want to even talk about trauma. And then you can have the other patient who is just wallowing in their trauma, almost attached and addicted to their trauma.
That's right.
And what I love that what you're saying is, we don't even have to get into that discussion, which is almost a Western approach. It's
Mhm.
more of like, let the medicine guide you and you'll feel it in your body.
Yeah, the thing that you're calling to mind is one of my distinct memories when I was at the Veterans Administration is how some people will harvest their trauma and their body will be really braced and tight about it. And if we place a needle into that, it's going to hurt, it's going to bleed, and they're not going to come back.
Mhm.
And some people, their bodies are really flaccid and collapsed. And I could needle and needle and needle, and they wouldn't feel the needle. There wouldn't be a change in their pulses. There wasn't a change in their symptoms because there wasn't that the chi didn't have enough tone to carry, the tissues didn't have enough tone to carry the chi. So that's when I developed these approaches that include touch and interaction to help prepare the field to receive the needle. And so that's the basis for my book, The Tao of Trauma. Talk about that, and also the course that I teach, The Tao of Trauma, where we go through each of the 5 steps of the self-protective response that are reflected in the 5 seasons of the 5 elements. We go through each one and we look at touch approaches, ways to help prepare the patient to receive the needle, so that no matter what our tradition of acupuncture, if we're 5 element, we're Dr. Tan, we're Sam, we're whatever we are, it doesn't matter, but that we can use these kinds of approaches to help the person access the power of our needles.
I love it. And I do remember we talked about your book, The Tao of Trauma, and you have a year-long training course, The Tao of Trauma. It's a year-long study. You meet 5 times a year. And I want to make sure we mention this. You have the next cohort is starting October 22nd of 2022, right?
Right. In Ojai, California, in person. Think of
In
that.
person.
In person in
Oh my
Ojai,
gosh.
California.
So,
October 22nd and 23rd, we're meeting in the metal module. We're looking at awakening arousal. Western science calls it interoception, or the function of the Po, our animal soul, to notice sensations and to have instinctive responses. And how do we work with those instinctive responses? How do we cultivate the capacity to recognize responses in our tissues and work with them, and have that breadth of time between impulse and response, so that we don't just react quickly and actually have time to consider our response. And it's a way we can get in trouble. So metal module, October 22nd and 23rd in Ojai. And then I'm also doing a virtual module, a virtual series, and that virtual class is November 12th and 13th.
Okay, got it. And I know you have a meet and greet to talk about the program October 15th. Anybody listening, send an email to Alaine. The email is alaineduncan@gmail.com, alaine.duncan@gmail.com, ALAINE.Duncan, DUNCAN @gmail.com. Send her an email right now and either come to the meet and greet on the 15th of October, or if you're really feeling the calling, there is no coincidence that you're listening to this at this moment. You have the chance to jump in on the year-long training, October 22nd to 23rd, because in a year, you're going to go into great depths on how to help people move through trauma. And so this is your opportunity. If that is not for you, but you are coming to Symposium, let's talk a little bit more, because you're speaking 3 times. One is going to be about expanding capacity. That's going to be 11 a.m. to noon on the 6th. And then later that afternoon on November 6th, you have 2 o'clock to 5 p.m. So a 3-hour deep dive with Alaine, the go-to for trauma, 5 element strategies for trauma survivors with complex multi-system illness. Sounds like we've already started to talk about that.
Yep. Yeah, that's all the stuff about allostatic load and core regulation.
Yeah.
And then Monday and Tuesday, the post-symposium retreat or post-symposium conference is going to be the Tao of Trauma, the kidney heart axis. So we'll talk about working in particular with expanding capacity in the kidney, and on Tuesday, expanding capacity in the heart and the fire element. And those will include demos with both online participants and in-person participants, some exercises to build up your own toolbox, and an opportunity to deepen that essential regulation between the kidney and the heart.
2 full days, everyone. That is what Alaine is talking to you about. It's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., November 7th and 8th. 2 full days you can spend with Alaine at the Pacific Symposium coming up, and there is the live streaming as well. So in those 2 days, you're going to talk about kidney heart access, and then the other one was the
first day will be the kidney, and the second day will be the heart. So it's it's a package, a 2-day package.
What are some examples of that manifesting? How would this show up in my practice?
I love that question. So when the kidney experiences fear, it gets hard and it lifts up, and the little adrenal gland that's sitting on top of the kidney squeezes up against the diaphragm, respiratory diaphragm, and squirts out adrenaline. So we end up in an adrenalized state. And the first thing it does is it sends a message across the co-cycle up to the pericardium. Help me, help me. So it's actually in our biology, when we feel threatened, to move towards another human being. If that feels foreign to you, it's probably because you've had some relationship kind of trauma in your past that has made it feel unsafe to move towards a human being when you experience a sense of threat. So the pericardium should help us connect with our tribe and help us resolve the fear, right? But if the arousal is too big, maybe it's a tsunami, or maybe our own capacity in our pericardium is limited by previous relationship-based trauma. Maybe we're being flooded by fear in the media and in politics. And so our capacity to recognize safety has been compromised. Something causes the pericardium to be unable to protect the heart from intrusion. So the heart gets penetrated, and then the heart sends out this massive alarm signal to the whole kingdom of the body. Boom, 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 panic, everybody online. All the fire trucks need to come out. The whole kingdom needs to respond. So the more the kidney can actually recognize safety as well as threat, the more judicious it can be about that signaling up to the pericardium. And the more our pericardium can expand to recognize the humanity in another human being instead of a sense of threat in another human being, then the less likely the heart will be penetrated. The less likely we're going to send that massive signal out that puts such a demand on our allostatic load, puts such a demand on the whole kingdom of the body, has to respond, because life threat, life threat, life threat. So the more that we can work with that dynamic between the kidney and the fire element, the pericardium and the heart in particular, the more we can help people navigate life in community. I call it, I say, all healing arises from embodied experiences of kinship.
Oh.
So if we can help people feel kinship in their tissues with humanity, we can reduce the impact of trauma, which is the basis for a lot of the polarization we're experiencing in our society today.
Yeah, and as you were speaking this, of course, I'm trying to put this through the lens of myself, and I imagine that a lot of your students that study with you heal themselves while they learn how to heal others through trauma. Is that
that's been the most remarkable and enriching thing about going through this 5-session year-long course? I've done it several times now, and just to watch people move into, expanded regulation, expanded wholeness, richer experiences of life. It's pretty juicy. It's really pretty juicy.
Especially considering the fact that they come there learning new tools to treat their patients. They end up healing themselves, which make them a more powerful healer. So in a sense, if you have 30 students in a year and each of those 30 students have 100 patients under them, you're affecting 3,000 to 30,000, the many people out there through your teachings. And I love these types of continuing education or just advanced trainings where we can heal ourselves in the process. And it sounds like your trainings, whether it's the symposium 2-day intensive or even the small 1-day morning talk and afternoon 3-hour workshop, or the year long, anybody that comes to your trainings are going to find wisdom in how to heal themselves and be better practitioners from it.
I hope so. I hope so. You know, I'm in the earth phase of my life, the time of harvesting what I've gained over now 32 years of practice, you know, and give it away. It's time for me to give it away. And it's just such a, there's so much sweetness in the next couple of generations of acupuncturists that are underneath me, watching them come forward and flourish and serve. I mean, it's just very enriching. I feel so met by the people in my classes, like taking this work and taking it out into the world. It's very, very heartwarming to me.
Taking it forward. Well, yeah, I mean, you are the genesis of this. And whenever I think of trauma or treating trauma, how to approach trauma, I always think of you. You're definitely a thought leader in that field. And I love, there's another thing that's occurring to me, and that is just to heal the planet. If we were to get really big and look from far away, you can do that healing one person at a time, right? So when the healer comes and learns this information, a different way of approaching trauma in their patients, they're going to apply it to themselves. They're going to be a more powerful healer. And ultimately, that is just going to raise vibrations and frequencies all over the place.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I mean, one of the things I commonly say is trauma is vibrational illness and acupuncture is vibrational medicine. And like trauma needs to be met by vibrational medicine. Acupuncture isn't the only vibrational medicine that can meet trauma. There's EMDR is certainly one, and somatic experiencing is another, and craniosacral work. And I mean, there's Qigong, Tai Chi, you know, there's a lot of things that are vibrational medicine, but that is what is required to transform.
Well, it's so interesting you say that, because I've experienced both. I've experienced EMDR and I've experienced acupuncture. And what I haven't experienced with EMDR that I have experienced with acupuncture and something like yoga is that somatic response, meaning I was doing some stretching in yoga and a part of my body that was maybe not stretched for a long time stretched, and it released this incredible emotion. I mean, how many yogis say they, cry on their mat? But the same thing has happened to me with acupuncture. Just having an interest, an everyday acupuncture point all of a sudden releases a memory or an emotion that was trapped inside. And I just love what you said, and I'm going to put it in the notes. Trauma is a vibrational illness, and acupuncture is a vibrational medicine. I'm sure you have a number of stories. I know last time we met for the podcast for last year, you shared an amazing story. Do you have other stories that come to your mind where you've been witness to this kind of transformation in people?
Yeah, the one that's coming to me right now, I thought of it when we were speaking earlier. This fellow that I treated at the Veterans Administration, he was going to New York to visit his daughter, and he was on the subway. And like many veterans with trauma experiences, it started to get full, and he started to feel wiggy. He doesn't like crowds, right? And every other time this had happened to him, he would wake up the next morning in jail with blood crusting his fists. He would black out. He would have that, that impulsive. There was no breath of time between stimulus and response. But this time, the doors opened and he got off the train. He found the moment. I want to weep. He found the moment that he could get off the train, and then he could get back on and he could go have a rich and meaningful visit with his daughter.
Yeah. What's
better for a girl than to have a good relationship with her dad?
Yeah.
So it's so sweet, and in that moment, every passenger on that train got a treatment.
Mm-hmm.
The NYPD got a treatment. The Veterans Administration didn't have to deal with another veteran on the front page of the New York Times, making a scene. It's like everybody got a treatment just because he found that moment, that breath of time to get off the train, and the next train wasn't so full and he could get back on and he could go love up his daughter.
And that's exactly what you are describing when you talk about expanding our capacity and helping to our patients to expand their capacity.
Right. One of my
I'm
favorite.
curious. Yeah, no, I love that. I'm curious, in that cycle, the element cycle, is there a tendency for trauma to get stuck in one element more than another? Are there patterns to that, or are they equally, is there equal stickness?
I think it has to do with our constitution. I think that where we are constitutionally strong and weak is what's going to show up in the middle of an automobile accident. For someone who has an automobile accident, who's a water CF, they're going to remember how frightened they were. Someone who's a fire CF is going to remember how kind the rescue personnel were, how loving and attentive they were. Someone who's a wood CF is going to have it in their fists while they were holding the steering wheel and they couldn't stop, they were trying to mobilize their response and it didn't work. Everybody's going to respond to the same circumstance out of their own inner vibration and their own strengths and weaknesses. So, the person who's the wood CF, we want to help them smooth out the stagnation that's in there. The one who's a water, we want to help them feel supported, feel protected again. There's different things are called for. I use these 5 words. I love these 5 words, East. They're so great.
Yeah.
So, protected. Respected belongs to the metal. Protected belongs to the water. Encouraged belongs to the wood. Loved belongs to the fire, and supported belongs to the earth. So all of us, one of those words is going to be particularly meaningful to us. I want to feel safe. I want to feel protected by somebody. I want to feel encouraged. I want to feel respected. I want to feel loved. I want to feel cared for. We've all got a place where, we want to be touched in order to feel more whole. So can we find our way to those experiences and let them inform our reality so that we can walk through life with that hole or that weak spot nourished a little bit? And then we can make it through our day with a little more equanimity, a little more ease, a little more balance, a little more embodied experience of kinship.
Yeah, I wrote that down. All healing comes from an embodied feeling of kinship. That's what you said, right?
Embodied experience of kinship. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that, embodied, because I just finished the book, Body Keeps a Score. The body keeps score. And it talks a lot about this from more of a Western angle, but the somatic response that our body stores our emotions and our traumas and our memories that way.
That's right.
And your approaches that you've uncovered over your 30 plus years of practice and study are using the 5 elements, balancing the 5 elements, helping a person take experiences and process them completely.
That's right.
To get the nutrients out of them, just like if we were digesting food.
Right. Digest the gristle.
Digest the gristle.
Last step, right? Digest the gristle. And lessons.
Do your approaches include acupuncture, acupressure, herbs? I heard you also say qigong, tai chi, possibly yoga. What are some of the modalities in your approaches?
Yeah. So what I teach is interaction, observation, and touch. We've all got so many, acupuncture is such a diverse practice of medicine that I think how we're all trained is beautiful. And what we need help with is how to manage patient management and setting up the patient to receive and harvest what we have to offer. So we use the 5-element construct, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you will use the 5-element kind of needling approach in your practice if what you're trained in is Dr. Tan or eight X's or whatever. They'll weave in together. You'll find your way that belongs to you.
Yeah.
It has to feel, we have to be able to put our own chi behind our needles.
Yeah.
So I want people to feel, to integrate what I have to say with what feels true to them.
Right. Like kind of create their own version of it based
That's
on
right.
interaction, observation, and touch. One of the things I wove into my practice and still do is I always touch a person's foot or feet. And that's just always been my thing. I was intuitively guided to that. And I will even say to them, I'd like to rub your feet if that's okay. And there's a great connection there. And another practitioner, it might be the hands, or they might sit bedside, or they might do the temples, but it's your interpretation of touch. And I love that you say that your approach is interaction, observation, touch, and then there can be variations within that.
Yeah. So we use the correspondences of the 5 elements. So in the metal, we talk about how to touch the skin. We talk about how to touch the respiratory diaphragm. How do help people find the Po? In the wood, we talk about touching the kidney adrenal system, touching the bone, touching the brain stem. In the wood, we talk about touching the liver blood, touching the tendons and the ligaments. In the fire, we touch the fascia and we touch the mediastinum. In the earth, we touch the viscera and we touch the muscle system. So we use the correspondences and kind of suss out. We're kind of like detectives. Like, where is it hidden? Where is it tucked away? And then how can I use touch, which sometimes is more accessible to trauma survivors than needles?
Oh yeah.
Touch to make the needles a little easier to cope with, or how can I access the energy body, the vibrational field, with touch if someone can't tolerate needles?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've always offered acupressure over, in lieu of acupuncture. If somebody is, I don't want needles, or that's a trigger for me, or got
to do it. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of crazy when I first started doing this work, and I was very entranced by the potential for working with trauma. And then I thought, well, I use sharp objects and burning herbs. How am I gonna work this out so that people can receive what I have to offer? So that's been some of my impulse too.
Where else do some traumas lie? Meaning, it goes without saying, the last 2 years, 20 to 2022, there's a lot of trauma in there for people in different ways. But I know you work a lot and extensively with the VA. Are there other demographics or pockets of the population that you see a lot of trauma around?
Yeah, I'm also part of Acupuncturists Without Borders. We have a local chapter here in the National Capital Area. I'm in the Mid-Atlantic, Piscataway Nation, near Prince George's County, so our chapter, our mission is to serve. We started in 2016 after that election, and we wanted to serve immigrants and refugees that were really being marginalized and polarized and so forth. So right now we're working with a group of young people in a jobs training program in Prince George's County that we're offering them auricular acupuncture every week as part of their program. They're about 70% Central American refugees, and the remainder are African American young people. And we're just getting started, but it's it's very meaningful to be offering this work in my neighborhood. And
are you already seeing great results with that population?
We're just getting started. We're just getting started with that group. We worked with Casa de Maryland before the pandemic, and that was a long time ago now. So we're just getting kicked back up into gear. But It's the
Oh my
opportunity
gosh, I love that.
to meet young people, while they're still pretty malleable, and the pandemic, the impact on the heart, for us to be told we need to isolate from each other. It made it very hard on our parasympathetic nervous system, our understanding of the tribe and who we belong with, and are people safe, and all of that.
You
So,
mentioned, you mentioned young population. Do you get involved with trauma in children? And if so, do you treat the mother and father combo with the child at the same time? That seems to be the pediatric approach.
yeah. I mean, people can look up the adverse childhood experiences research that's on the CDC website to understand the impact of early trauma, which is very high rates of both morbidity and mortality in adulthood, and certainly making use of the law of mother-child to help, because really it's vibrational medicine, so working with the field around in the family is really what's any regulation that comes into any system helps the whole system.
Helps the whole system. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the stuff is so good.
It is so good.
It's so good. It definitely lands so beautifully on my heart. Whenever you and I talk about this and the work that you're doing in the world, it warms and opens the capacity of my heart, knowing that you're out there leading the charge, training other people to be these beacons of light in the world of hope and healing. And so I just want to summarize for everybody listening. You're going to be at Symposium. It's going to be live streamed November 6th. You're going to be talking from 11 to noon, the 5-element applications to manage challenging people and circumstances. And Alaine has beautifully described what that means. And then that afternoon, a 3-hour deep dive, 5-element strategies for trauma survivors with complex multi-system illness. We have definitely done a little bit of a deep dive into that talk today. And then a 2-day intensive with you, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. for 2 days, transforming trauma. Now this is where you can have an even greater impact, cultivating the capacity in the kidney axis, the kidney and heart axis over 2 days. And then if that's not enough, and it doesn't sound like it would be, you are invited, anybody listening, to join the Tao of Trauma year-long program that begins October 22nd, and contact Alaine to get more details and see if you can come in on that. And she does have the meet and greet online, 1 p.m. Pacific time, October 15th, to get more information on that. All you have to do is email her at alaine.duncan@gmail.com. And also your website is integrativehealingnetworks.net.
Integrativehealingworks.net.
Oh, thank you. Integrativehealingworks.net. I'll say it one more time, integrativehealingworks.net, and click the top navigation under trainings, and you'll see that the 2022 to 2023 Tao of Trauma training is beginning October 22nd. So this is your chance to get out there and have a bigger impact and carry on the work of Alaine Duncan into the world. I can't wait to see you. I am so excited to see you. I'm going to be at Symposium. We have all sorts of things happening at Symposium. There's going to be the dinner for everybody. There is a speakers dinner happening. So I'll see you personally there. But anybody listening could come and see you, because it sounds like you're going to be there for the 4 or 5 day duration of the event in the conference. And I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. I'll see you in about a month.
See you in about a month. All righty. Bye-bye.